Welcome to Rewild by Design, a podcast for women in midlife who are ready to burn the rule book, drop the good girl mask, and come home to who they really are. I'm your host, Marissa, a human design and Gene Keys mentor, and your guide in this wild woman era. Get ready for bold conversations, raw truths, and the kind of insights that'll shake you awake. Because midlife isn't the end of your story. It's the point where you finally get to write it your way. Welcome back to Rewild by Design. I'm your host, Marissa Gordon, and I am really excited to be talking about this topic today. It's all about deconditioning. Before we get into it, I have tried to record this episode, no lie, 4 times. And for whatever reason, I have had issues, delays, what have you, but I feel like this message is too important to let it go. So, when we're talking about deconditioning, this is the process of peeling back the layers of all the rules and roles and expectations that you were taught to carry so that you can finally live from your own energy. And midlife is often when all of those layers start to feel really unbearable. The weight and the pressure of them cracks wide open to the realization most of this wasn't even mine to begin with, right? We're carrying all of this quote unquote baggage. And the conditioning process is not necessarily evil or bad because conditioning starts when we're young and it's a natural part of the human experience because we were taught that what was acceptable versus what wasn't acceptable and which parts of you were praised and which parts of you were shamed. For some of us, right, that came from our family, our birth families or families of origin. Maybe you were rewarded for being the peacemaker or punished for speaking your mind or having those big feelings. And for others of us, maybe it came from school or church or the culture or society. Good grades meant approval. Staying small kept you safe. And taking care of others made you worthy. Now, over time, these lessons stack on one another. And before you know it, you're living a version of yourself that was molded to keep everyone else comfortable. But like I said, by midlife, those cracks start to show. And they're not just like those nice smile lines that we get, right, on our face. In midlife, you notice that when you've been saying yes, but every part of your body has been screaming no, or you shrink your voice in meetings or relationships because you don't want to be too much. Or what about you push yourself to keep the house and the kids and the career or the business and that outward image all pristine? And then collapse at night wondering why you're exhausted and resentful. These are all symptoms of living by someone else's script. The body keeps the receipts. Fatigue, burnout, irritation, this sense of emptiness or longing for more, and then the guilt that comes along with all of these feelings. They all point back to one thing: deconditioning. And getting to the point of noticing where we have been conditioned and then what are we going to do about it? So first, I want to talk a little bit about conditioning and deconditioning through the lens of human design. Because human design offers us this map of where to spot conditioning and how it holds a grip on your life. So by human design types, let's look at generators. You're told that you have to commit to everything and finish what you start. even when your gut is checked out. And that's not your truth. You thrive when you're able to respond to what excites you, not what drains you. Manifesting generators. Often you're shamed for being scattered or unreliable or flaky. Or why can't you just pick one thing? Right? And the conditioning tells you that you have to stick to it. But your energy is designed to pivot and explore and play and experiment and change directions when that spark fades. Now, projectors, you're pushed to keep grinding like everybody else. You're taught that your worth equals your output. And that conditioning leads to bitterness and burnout. But projectors, you thrive when you guide, not when you keep up the pace of that 9 to 5 hamster wheel. And manifestors, you're trained to ask permission, follow the rules, and not ruffle any feathers, right? Stay in line. That conditioning dulls your power, though, because your design is all about initiating, carving new paths, and letting others follow your lead. And reflectors, you can often absorb conditioning most intensely through your environments who told you who to be. If you grew up in a space that shames your sensitivity or your need for space and time, you end up losing trust in your own inner wisdom. And your deconditioning work is all about finding those nourishing environments where you can reflect back the possibility to your community. Now, conditioning doesn't just show up as human design types, right? We're not in a vacuum here. But through, again, the lens of human design, this conditioning can show up often in our open centers. Now, that's not to say that conditioning can't happen in our defined centers, because a lot of times it does. But in the open centers, that's where we're a little bit more malleable and vulnerable to taking in energy from others and amplifying it or identifying with it as our own. And when you don't know what's yours and what isn't, you end up living from borrowed patterns. And here's how that might look in each of the 9 energy centers. So we'll start from the top down. Looking at the head center. With an open or undefined head, you can feel this pressure to answer everyone else's questions or to solve problems that don't even belong to you. This can lead to a lot of overthinking and ruminating and mental pressure that never seems to turn off. Now, with an open ajna or an undefined ajna, the conditioning here is to believe that you have to be certain. You may feel this pressure to always have the right answer, to defend your perspective, or to stick rigidly to just one point of view and one way of thinking when you're actually meant to be highly flexible. And with an open or undefined throat center, the conditioning here is about speaking to get attention rather than waiting for that right timing. You may feel this pressure to fill the silence. So a lot of times that silence feels really uncomfortable, and we don't like to sit in that discomfort. Or prove your value through your words, or even change how you speak depending on who you're with. And when we look at the open or undefined G center / identity center, this area is vulnerable to conditioning around love, direction, and identity. So you might, if with an open or undefined G, you might feel like you constantly have to find yourself, or that your worth comes from being loved by others. Environments play a huge role here too, because where you are can shape how you see yourself. Then, when we look at the open or undefined heart or ego center, you can fall into this proving energy. And the conditioning here tells you that your worth is tied to achievements, status, or your promises. So you might overcommit or overwork just to prove you're enough. But I see the beauty and the lesson in the open or undefined will setter is you are enough just as you are because you chose to incarnate in this lifetime. Now, when we look at the open or undefined solar plexus, this often gets conditioned into avoiding conflict at all costs. You may say yes when you mean no, bury your feelings, or bend yourself to keep the peace. And this can lead to this resentment or disconnection from your own emotional truth. And an open sacral center can absorb that just push through conditioning. You just got to keep going. And you might believe here that you have a limitless energy supply and try to push past your exhaustion, ignoring your body's signals. And this over time can create cycles of burnout and collapse because you're not built for constant and consistent output. Now, with an open spleen or an undefined spleen center, the conditioning often looks like holding on to what's unhealthy, whether it's people or habits or environments, because it feels safer to stick with what's familiar than letting go and stepping into the unknown. And this can also manifest as taking on fears that don't belong to you. And lastly, with an open or undefined root center, this center absorbs pressure to move fast and get everything done right now. You got to get it done. The conditioning pushes you to race against time and to unconsciously try to relieve other people's stress and to confuse urgency with importance. Now, I want to pause because if you've found yourself feeling really familiar with what I've said, this isn't a bad thing. We're opening a doorway. And these are just this awareness of places that you might have been living out patterns that were never yours to begin with. So that noticing and that awareness is the first step to releasing that death grip of conditioning and finally coming back to yourself. Now, let's say you go through life and you never address the conditioning. Majority of the population of the world is living in that field, right? But here's what happens. You keep repeating the same patterns over and over again and wondering why this stuff keeps coming up. Like the people pleasing, the overworking, the caretaking, hoping that these patterns or these tendencies will finally fill some void. And spoiler, they don't. Or you can lose touch with what actually excites you and what brings you joy and lights you up. So life ends up feeling just blah and gray and kind of dull. Or I've talked to women who look around at 45, 50, or 60 or beyond and think, holy shit, I lived everyone else's life but my own. What the fuck do I do now? And this isn't just about our feelings and emotions, right? Staying in the conditioned states impacts our relationships, our health, and even our finances. Because when you live out of sync with your natural energy and who you really are at your core, everything costs more than it should. So let's so we're talking about deconditioning and the awareness. So how do we actually start deconditioning? Deconditioning is not just this one and done, one time event. Oh, I'm going to wake up one day. I am going to be fully deconditioned because I know what my human design chart says, and that's that. Pack it up, go home. No, this is an ongoing process of awareness and noticing where you're living by someone else's rules and then actively choosing differently. And this can look like, number one, saying no without explaining yourself. No is a full sentence, N-O, period. Or pausing before you commit to something and checking in on how your body responds. Or creating intentional space for rest, even if the world calls it lazy. Or naming what you want out loud so that it loosens its grip. And even if what you name disappoints someone in your life, including those closest to you, each small step unhooks you from that old script that's running in the background and finally roots you back into your own way of being. Now, as we wrap up this episode, I want to end with some reflection questions that you can just take with you, come back to it if you need to come back to this episode as well. But number one, where in your life are you still proving yourself? Number two, which shoulds feel the heaviest right now? And number three, what's one small boundary you could set this week that loosens the grip of conditioning? Now, I will remind you that this deconditioning process is not about becoming someone new, not you 2.0. Deconditioning and the work that we do to decondition ourselves is about coming back to the person that you always were before the world told you who to be. And if you'd like some support in your deconditioning process, I invite you to grab my free energy snapshot audio. I'll link it in the show notes. And in less than 10 minutes, you'll hear exactly how your energy type naturally works and maybe some shifts that can help you stop pouring energy into all the wrong places. And if you want to go even deeper, I will link my Decode Your Design guide in there as well. This is a full-length digital human design reading that goes deep into your chart. So all aspects of it. So if you're ready to really go in and decondition the hell out of your chart, I invite you to check that one out too. So until the next time we talk, just take it one step at a time and one small awareness at a time, because that's the work of rewilding and deconditioning. Well, that's it for this episode of Rewild by Design. I trust that you got what you needed here today, and just remember, you don't need another checklist.